Welcome to the India Fintech Diaries, the only podcast focused exclusively on the Indian fintech market. I'm Elroy.
And I'm Hemant. In each episode, we dive into the latest trends, ideas, innovations, business models, and personalities that are shaping India's fintech landscape.
We also invite amazing guests who are innovators and industry players that are driving the change that is helping make financial services more modern, innovative, and inclusive in India. Come join us as we explore the changing landscape of fintech in India. Welcome back to India Fintech Diaries, the show where we discuss all things Indian fintech. After a short late winter break, we are back with all new content that focuses on the ever changing landscape of Indian fintech. What are we discussing today, Hemant?
Well, Elroy, for today's episode, we will look at a new and emerging space that has the potential to not just change how millions of Indians shop online, but also impact the fintech industry that powers that revolution. I am talking about Open Network for Digital Commerce or ONDC. To discuss ONDC, we have with us today Susmit Patodia, Director at Antler. Welcome to India FinTech Diary, Susmit.
Thank you. Very, very excited to be here.
Susmit, thanks a ton for joining us here today. Before we begin, can you quickly introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background, and also tell our listeners a little bit about Antler?
Sure, Alra. I hail from Chennai, did my commerce there, worked for a mutual fund company way back in 2002 when the
Okay.
whole industry was just a 1 lakh crore AUM. That's the amount of SIPs we get now in a year. So, seen the evolution of that industry. Went on to work with Accenture Consulting for about 3 years and then spent 15 years in listed markets. My last role was a fund manager. Somewhere around just before COVID is where my interest in this whole tech ecosystem was sparked, primarily by the IPOs that were coming in. And I thought that the more people I met, the more companies I met, I became convinced that the next 10 years in India is not only about the decade of India, but what I call the decade of India. You are going to see so many entrepreneurs come up that I was desperate to think about moving closer to this ecosystem. And that's where Antler intertwined. And one of my core missions of moving from the listed world to Bangalore is to connect Kurla and Koramangala. I don't think these two worlds talk to each other very well,
Yep.
and there is so much value to be derived for both these worlds when they talk to each other. So yeah, that's where that's been my journey into the startup world. On Antler, Antler is a 6-year-old firm now present in 25 countries across the world. India is a 2-year-old setup. It was founded by Rajiv and Nitin. Rajiv, most of you may know, was the founder of Urban Ladder, the first online furniture company. And once it was sold to Reliance, he started Antler. Antler globally invests only in pre-seed. We back founders from day zero and hopefully till greatness. This year, we also will overtake Y Combinator as the most active investor in the world. We will do over 600 startups. So yeah, that's Antler. Very, very exciting journey.
Excellent. That's pretty interesting, Susmit. Susmit, today the size of the e-commerce industry in India is about maybe 40 to $50 billion, and it's been one of the most rapidly growing segments of the economy in India. It's expected to grow to almost maybe 120 to $150 billion over the next 3 to 5 years, as per a recent FICCI report. But even then, if you look at the actual penetration of e-commerce into the entire economy per se, it's just about 5 to 7% of the overall retail in the country. So, talk to us a little about how we got here and some of the challenges faced by the space.
So how we got here is very interesting. I think the whole unlock happened, you know, intertwined because of a few events happening back to
Okay.
back. Started with Demon. I think that was the first real event that made people comfortable in online payment, and that took away one big friction point of e-commerce adoption in India, which is payment. The second was GST. I think GST reduced the advantages of not being formal, which again lends to e-commerce. As you know, e-commerce cannot cater to the informal economy because
Right.
everything is tracked. So I think GST was the second, I would say, factor that caused higher or increased adoption. And third is venture capital. I think without capital, you cannot explode this sector. We can have a debate
Yep.
on how much is good, how much is bad, but you cannot take away the fact that venture capital and capital from all over the world contributed to the explosion of e-commerce. So yeah, these three factors took us from nearly 0% 10 years ago to 8%, which is fantastic. But the challenges are, if you just go back, I think any new commerce is constrained by the friction that the customers have to face as they adopt it, right? So today, if you look at 5 years ago, the friction was payments, right?
Right.
Cash on delivery was super expensive. It was very, very tedious, and hence e-commerce adoption was very slow. Today, the impediment seems to be from the seller's perspective, which is the very, very high, what I call participation rate into the e-commerce. Right? If you look at the general participation rate, it ranges anywhere from 15 to 25%,
Yeah.
irrespective of who you are, where you are, what you do, or what you sell. And that to us seems like the next big friction point, which needs to be eliminated for e-commerce penetration to go high.
And what role has platforms such as Flipkart and Amazon actually played in possibly growing the sector? That's one question that I would have. And the other question is, in your opinion, what's also broken about the way platforms approach the space?
Right, Elroy. So, we have to look everything with the context. So, let me start with the context of Flipkart and Amazon. 7 years ago, if you were to order from someone whom you didn't know,
Right.
there was a massive trust deficit for you to go out, pay that person,
Right.
and wait for 24 hours to get the delivery. Right?
That's
And
right.
that's what app Flipkart and Amazon plugged in, which is what we call, there are two aspects to any platform they bring to the market. One is the infrastructure, and the second is governance. Let me
Okay.
explain this to you, and then probably tie this in as well into where we are today. When I say infrastructure, it means allowing buyers to browse, allowing buyers to select, and getting the sellers on the platform. Right. So this whole
Right.
infrastructure of buyer browsing, seller fulfilling, and ensuring that the delivery happens. So this is the
Okay.
infrastructure of any commerce, right? You go into a
Yeah.
market, you look at something, you buy, and you take it home. Now come the governance part, which I think is what Flipkart and Amazon brilliantly solved, which is they backstopped the governance layer of the transaction, right? So if you ordered something from a bookseller in Timbuktu, uh,
Right.
it didn't matter as long as they were verified by Amazon or Flipkart, it was delivered to you, right?
Yeah.
So these are two huge things that these platforms fulfill, right? Which is governance and infrastructure.
Right.
And for this, they obviously, took a participation rate from the buyer, from the seller mostly, and sometimes from the buyer as well, which is 20 to 25%. Now you come over to the context where we are today, which is a lot of these services have now been broken down into specialized niches. Right? So you have someone who does
Right.
logistics very well, someone who can be a great a discovery platform, and someone who can verify the sellers. So there
Right.
are now companies which have emerged in all these three aspects of infrastructure. Now comes the governance part, and this is where I think the whole advent of blockchain and data contracts have brought the revolution to this context, which is, do you need someone to control the governance, or can data itself be controlled by certain protocols?
Okay.
So that's where we are today, which is that what you needed Flipkart and Amazon a few years ago to ensure that both these services are fully provided for. But as we have evolved, uh, do we need one company to do it all? Is the real big question in front of everyone for the next 10 years to be answered.
I think that kind of gets me a very nice segue into what ONDC is all about. So maybe, Susmit, you could also quickly contrast with the same mental construct of governance and trust, right? And look at what is ONDC actually trying to solve, and what's the problem statement that ONDC is trying to solve, and how is it different or similar to the platforms and the kind of e-commerce we have today?
Great. So ONDC is firstly a protocol, right? And I think a lot of
Right.
people think about ONDC as a website or as a platform which is in competition to Amazon. It is not, right? It is
Right.
just a protocol. It's a set of rules which allows for commerce to happen in an interoperable way and a disaggregated way. Right? That's all it
Right.
is. It is not an Amazon killer. It is not a Swiggy killer. It is not a Zomato killer, right? It
Right.
is just the evolution. of commerce. Now, if I were to take the same mental model of governance and infrastructure, let's look at infrastructure. Today, you can use a Google or a Paytm or a phone pay to search for something you want to buy, right?
Right.
The experience today may not be as good as you have in Amazon or Flipkart, but you can still do it, right? Secondly, you can then decide whether you want to get the delivery by a load share, a delivery, or even a blue dart, right? And thirdly, the sellers, because they have digitized their catalogs thanks to these platforms earlier, can actually attach themselves to anybody and able to sell you what you're looking for, right? So this is how ONDC, basically the protocol, breaks these three things down into independent units or participants of that network, right? So a buyer, a seller, and a fulfillment agency, all three are different participants. Now, the question that you may have is, how do I have a seamless commerce transaction if all these three parties are different? And this is where the protocol comes in. There is a set of standard protocols, standard set of rules and software SDKs, where if you comply with them, and you will get on the protocol, and the protocol rules will take care that this transaction is seamless.
So, Sushmit, if we have to understand this entire process more from, say, the buyer's point of view and look at a whole journey, say I am ordering, say, a ballpoint pen on one of the buyer apps, how does the journey look like? Because the question in my mind is, if I am the one ordering, who takes care of weaving, saying, okay, I'm on the buyer app, so that's selected, but which delivery model or logistic player I require, which payments app would be used, who would I go to if there is a problem with the delivery? All those questions arise. So if you can just walk us through the entire journey with one, say, customer journey, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So, let's say you go to Google, right, and you say, I want a ballpoint pen, right?
Right.
Uh, Now, assume Google is on ONDC, connected to the ONDC protocol, and there are 10 pen sellers, right, who
Mhm.
have also come on to the ONDC protocol. Now, how do you come on to the ONDC protocol? Just to explain that, it's a very, very simple process. There are multiple seller apps where you can go and say, okay, can you help me get on ONDC? And they'll help you get on ONDC, right? All they do is connect you to the ONDC protocol, right? You're looking for a ballpoint pen. You see 10 sellers who can sell you a ballpoint pen. Now you can choose anyone, right? And here is where the protocol's power comes in, which is they are not sorted by ad fees paid, right? They are not
Okay.
sorted by things that are not useful to a customer, right? You select one. Now, after you select, it again gives you an option as to what kind of fulfillment participant do you want. So let's
Mm.
say you have three options: cheapest, fastest, moderately cheap, moderately fast, right? You can choose any of the
Mm.
three, right? Today, as I say, you really don't have too much choice of fulfillment, right? So, if you've ordered a 50,000 rupees laptop from Amazon or a 500 rupees charging wire, your delivery experience is the same, right? Now, should it be the same? I don't think so. And that is where you can actually choose the way you want to get fulfilled. So if you want a ballpoint pen now, it may cost you 2 rupees extra, but it'll deliver to you in 10 minutes. Do you want it for tomorrow office and you don't care about it, but if it comes, as long as it comes in 24 hours, you may get it cheaper. So that is again a seamless follow through. And then the payment happens to your buyer app, which will ensure that it is passed on to the seller and the fulfillment parties, right? So for the customer, it does not feel like they have gone through five loops or five transactions. For them, it is just in one additional click, which is to choose your fulfillment partner. Now, let's say there is an issue and the ballpoint pen reaches you, but there is no
Mm.
refill. Okay, uh,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you want to raise it up. So this responsibility in the protocol lies with the buyer app, right? So you raise the issue,
Okay.
and you again, this is the governance layer. It is called the ODR layer, or the online dispute resolution layer.
Mm.
Just to avoid becoming too technical, basically what happens is that the buyer, sends out a signal to the seller app that this has not happened. and then the seller app can either replace it or process the refund. Right? Very simple. All this happens for the buyer seamlessly.
One small question there, then, Sushmit. If ODR, and please feel free to become technical. I think our listeners are only the ones who really are keen on fintech. So feel free to do that. On the ODR side, because they are playing this role, from financial standpoint, who pays to the ODR? Is it the buyer who pays or the seller who pays for the service that they are plugging into the entire journey?
The all payment. Please do remember that all
Hmm.
payments happen from the buyer app, right? Because that
Okay.
is the
Hmm.
central repository of the money. Right? They wire the money to the seller. Now, if an ODR is triggered,
Hmm.
the way this is envisaged is that, see, these are going to be extremely low payment calls, right? So, for example,
Right.
the seller app may not charge more than 3% of the whole transaction to the seller, right?
Hmm.
A buyer app may not charge
Hmm.
more than 1%. An ODR ping may not be more than 10 paise. So this is all about volume. So the payment to ODR is actually, what ODR does is will just be a blockchain enabled dispute resolution mechanism, right? So it's
Got it.
actually going to be a program at the back.
That's very interesting. Actually, this raises so many questions and so many opportunities in my mind as well. Because the point you said that when you want to connect a seller to the entire system, there is a protocol. But then I also see that if you are plugging into, say, multiple basically seller solutions, maybe there is some support required by the actual shop as well for them to have something in front of their face to manage their integration into multiple seller apps and tracking their selling, cash flows, everything on a single interface and everything. So yeah, I think like too many opportunities there. Now, since Sushmit, ONDC is looking to decentralize, and unbundle a lot of traditional elements of e-commerce, can you tell us what the current traction on ONDC is? Who are the main builders? What's happening?
Also, ONDC is, I would say, still extremely early in its journey. You pretty much have almost, I think the logistics layer is now packed. You have
Mhm.
Amazon recently announced that it will be a part of ONDC. So you have Delivery, Dunzo, Amazon, Loadshare, ShipRocket, etc. Everyone on the logistics part. There is a host of seller apps which are coming up slowly. You have people like Seller App, eSamudai, Growth Falcons, N-Store, and so on, right? So these are what we call seller apps. Now, what their job is, they primarily do two things, right? So if you're a Kirana, you are not going to have the software expertise or the wherewithal to go and enroll onto ONDC, right? To manage the
Right.
SDKs, etc., etc. So you go to, let's say, an N store and say, get me on ONDC. N store will
Mm.
do very, very simple. They'll help you with the cataloging, and they will put your catalog up on ONDC. That's it. They will manage the whole seller app for that Kirana, for example. And so think of them as a form of Shopify, right, for that Kirana store. And a buyer app can be anyone, and I think this is where you will see a lot of innovation. Today, the what we call the Instagram buying experience is broken. Can Instagram become a buyer app? Why not?
Mm.
Right? Today, people like Airtel, Vodafone, and Jio have the largest digital consumer real estate, but there's no commerce that happens there except you paying your bill. Now, if the three of these have 800 million subscribers, and that's the primary way to access commerce, can they become buyer apps? They can, right? You already have Paytm and PhonePe, which are the other owners of large digital customers who are becoming buyer apps. So, you could have any of these people becoming buyer apps. Seller app are going to look like technology or SaaS or Shopify kind of players who help a lot of these commerce entities come online. And then you logistics is fairly simple for you to understand. ODR is something that is, I would say, still in the infancy. There are a lot of players in this. There are Credgenics, Webnai, ADRS. So there are a few players, but this is something that even ONDC as a protocol is putting in place right now.
Now, since along with the flow of goods, there is a flow of money, and we are on a fintech podcast, so the obvious question is, in your opinion, what's the opportunity on ONDC for the entire fintech space. What are your thoughts on the role fintech will play and the opportunity that exists when it comes to ONDC for fintech?
Great. So this is where the part of the governance comes in. One of the biggest disadvantages of being on a platform for a seller is they don't know who their customer is.
Right.
Correct. This gets solved with ONDC because you know who your customer, right?
Hmm.
Which means, and the second aspect is you are also your ratings, right? Now imagine if I'm an Uber driver or I'm a seller on Amazon, and what is my resume? My resume is the ratings that I have on these platforms.
Correct.
Correct. Now, if something wrong happens and I lose all my ratings, I basically have no business resume anymore,
Yeah.
right? So these are the two things that get unlocked from ONDC for a seller, which is I know who my customer is, and secondly, I am in control of my ratings. Now let's keep this thought and move to the money angle. Now, when money moves, currently you will need what we call you will need a RSP switch, right, which is the reconciliation and settlement switch, where I mean, think of them as a Visa or a Mastercard switch, right? So you will need that switch between the buyer and seller app. So that is the first fintech opportunity. They in turn will interact with the NPCI switch, for example, ensuring that the money is flowing between the banks and ONDC, right? So this is how the money
Right.
flow happens. Now, let's say I'm buying a 50,000 rupee laptop through ONDC. A fintech can actually sit on top of this switch or be a part of the switch or seller app and give me instant finance, right?
Right.
And I don't have to be on a platform to give you instant finance. I can be anyone as long as I'm plugged into the ONDC protocol. I can give you instant finance,
Yeah.
right? Number one. So this is the first, I think, where fintech would be very, very useful. But you already have shades of this on the current platforms. The more interesting aspect is on the seller side financing, right?
Right.
Now, as soon as a seller gets an order, the seller knows who the customer is. The seller knows exactly what the order is. And now, if I'm a fintech who wants to only finance sellers, I can do a order-wise financing to the seller, depending on the rating, depending on who the customer is, depending on the size of the order, depending on the delivery cycle of the order, etc., etc., which was not possible earlier.
Yeah.
That to us is the much bigger opportunity, which is and this has been a problem in India, right? Which is this whole SME financing. It's something that we've spoken about a lot, but not got great ways to solve this yet. I think
Right.
this could be a great way to solve it. So I'm a Kanchipuram sari seller in Kanchipuram. I've got a sari order for 10 saris. These saris can be very expensive. Let's say 20,000 rupees a sari, 2 lakh rupees of order. The buyer is a great CIBIL score holder, and I want financing for 4 days. For the time I procure my silk, we even send it off. Can a fintech sit on top of this and give me financing for 4 days?
While this addresses the fintech aspect of it, right? In the recent report that you authored, you also called ONDC as a $80 billion opportunity for the economy, right? Can you dive a little bit deeper into that? Other than fintech, what are some of the other white spaces in ONDC that startups can look at building for today?
Yeah, and this is really what is the most exciting part for us as venture capitalists, right?
Yeah.
Which is that if you look at today in e-commerce, you either have $10 billion plus outcomes
Yes.
or you have nothing.
It's basically a winner takes all in short.
Yeah, correct. Because, and one of the reasons for that is that you have to develop the full stack for you to have a right to win,
Right.
right? Which is buyer, seller, fulfillment, governance, the whole stack, which is very, very challenging, correct? Now, why we put out that 80 billion is very simple, right? We believe that the total valuation that e-commerce companies currently have is approximately $80 billion, right? And we said that this is dominated by four people are valued at 80% of that. Now, if I'm allowed to build stack by stack, right, or build or break that stack down and build only for buyer, only for seller, can we have 80 unicorns rather than 4 decacons in the e-commerce space going forward? And that is really our vision. We believe that there will be one logistics provider who will specialize and do so well as being a part of ONDC that they will go on to become a unicorn. There will be a
Right.
seller app who will cater to, let's say, all the kiranas in India, right? Or even in West India, and has the potential to become a unicorn. There may be a logistics person who can actually, like, one of the big issues in India has been furniture, right? Furniture e-commerce penetration is less than 4% because fulfillment is such a big problem in India when it comes to
Yeah.
furniture. Now imagine I am going to try and become the just the furniture fulfillment player, and I'll do it for anybody,
Yeah.
right? Can I become a unicorn? Right. So those are the kind of things that we envisage can happen, which is, if you unbundle and disaggregate, you have the opportunity for founders to specialize and become efficient.
Awesome. I think, Sushmit, this was a great conversation. We are coming out of this podcast learning so much about ONDC than what we knew getting into the podcast. So, if, Sushmit, this has piqued the interest of our listeners and they want to know more and reach out to you, what would be the best way that the listeners can connect with you?
Even the best way is to just drop me an email. Our job
Perfect.
is to talk to founders and discuss with them. We we are ready to talk to as many people who are interested in building on ONDC. My email ID is susmit.patodia at antler.co. Just drop me a mail.
That's a pretty simple email ID, but still, what we'll do is we'll include that email ID in the show notes. Thanks once again, Sushmit, for coming on the show and spending time with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for what you're doing for our ecosystem.
Thanks, Sushmit. That's it from India FinTech Diaries for this week. Do log on to our website, indiafintechdiaries.com, for exclusive content. We also cover fintech deep dives in our Substack newsletter, so do subscribe. And until next time, mask on and stay safe.